Is that because you fear failure?
No, Beth. The way we've constructed it is that there are foundational things that a government must do.
Parliament erupted in chaos yesterday as Conservative frontbencher Victoria Atkins did the unthinkable, calling Prime Minister Keir Starmer a liar directly to his face. In a moment that shattered centuries of parliamentary decorum, Starmer stood shell-shocked as MPs gasped at this unprecedented breach of protocol. But what drove this explosive confrontation? Behind this public humiliation lies a policy disaster that's forcing private schools to close their doors and sending thousands of teachers to the unemployment line. The same man who benefited from elite education is now denying it to others, and Parliament just couldn't take the hypocrisy anymore.
Anybody in the country is not untouched by what happened yesterday.
You've talked about tackling knife crime a moral mission for your government.
I'm convinced that if we can show that politics can change Britain for the better, then we can face the future with confidence.
Before we move on, I'd like to ask you a small favour. If you appreciate this content, please take a second to like this video and subscribe to the channel. Over 98% of you watch the videos without subscribing. It costs you nothing, but it makes a huge difference to us. So, did you click the subscribe button? Great. Thank you so much. Now, back to the video. The recent parliamentary showdown over Keir Starmer's controversial VAT policy wasn't simply a momentary clash. It was the inevitable explosion of a ticking time bomb. For months, Starmer has championed his 20% VAT levy on private education as a financial boon for state schools, promising billions in additional funding. But the reality unfolding across Britain tells a drastically different story. Look no further than the village school for girls in Camden, a striking case that literally sits in Starmer's own constituency. This respected institution didn't mince words when announcing its closure, explicitly naming the Prime Minister's VAT policy as the final financial straw that made continuing operations impossible. The bitter irony of a school in Starmer's backyard becoming a casualty of his own policy hasn't been lost on critics. And this wasn't an isolated incident. As multiple private schools began shutting their doors, a domino effect rippled through the education system.
I'm here to speak to this man, not your security. You have failed me.
Thank you.
I've been a Labour voter my entire life. You have failed to be the opposition.
Has the time not come, Prime Minister, to prescribe what is so obviously a terrorist organisation?
Thousands of students suddenly found themselves without classrooms, creating a massive influx into state schools already bursting at the seams. These state institutions, the very ones Starmer claimed would benefit from his policy, now struggle with overcrowding and insufficient resources to handle the unexpected surge. While Starmer continues to insist his VAT measures would generate funds for public education, the immediate consequences paint a starkly different picture. The policy has triggered job losses among educators, dismantled established learning communities, and left families scrambling for alternatives in an increasingly limited educational landscape. For many working-class parents who made significant financial sacrifices to provide their children with opportunities through private education, Starmer's policy has slammed doors shut. These aren't wealthy elites, but ordinary families who budgeted carefully to access what they believed was the best path for their children's futures. The frustration has boiled over in Parliament, where MPs have repeatedly confronted Starmer with evidence of the damage his policy has caused. Yet the Prime Minister's responses have become increasingly detached from the reality experienced by affected families and schools. His persistent denial of the obvious consequences has created a credibility chasm that widens with each parliamentary session. When challenged about these outcomes, Starmer has doubled down, refusing to acknowledge the growing evidence contradicting his rosy projections. This stubborn detachment from reality created the perfect storm that ultimately led to that unprecedented moment. A direct accusation of dishonesty on the parliamentary floor.
Fine, can we just... Do you understand?
Shall we go on in?
Thousands of people have died because you have failed to do your job and asked the real question.
No income tax, no national insurance, no VAT.
Means that this budget raises taxes by £40 billion.
Behind Starmer's unwavering defence of his VAT policy lies perhaps the most damning contradiction of his political career. The man who climbed the social ladder through a grammar school education, one that later became a private institution, is now actively demolishing similar opportunities for today's working class children. This isn't just political inconsistency, it's a betrayal of his own origin story. Starmer's educational background reveals much about the man behind the policies. The Prime Minister proudly benefited from precisely the type of educational pathway his VAT policy now threatens to eliminate. As a scholarship student, he experienced firsthand how access to quality education can transform a young person's life trajectory. He's spoken extensively about the pride he takes in his educational journey and how it shaped his career, making his current stance all the more perplexing. What's particularly troubling is how his VAT policy specifically undermines the scholarship and bursary programs that create opportunities for working-class students. These programs, the very same type that gave Starmer his start, are being decimated as schools struggle to absorb the new tax burden. The irony is palpable. A man who rose through merit-based educational opportunities is now systematically dismantling those same pathways for the next generation.
Is obvious, but border security is equally obvious in my view, and that's why I've said we are committed to bringing down immigration.
The scholarship cuts represent more than just budget adjustments. They represent shattered dreams for countless bright children from modest backgrounds who will never get the chance that Starmer had. While private schools that survive this policy will continue to educate the truly wealthy, it's the aspiring middle class and scholarship students who bear the brunt of these changes. The ladders of opportunity are being pulled up behind him. This fundamental contradiction hasn't gone unnoticed by the British public. Many voters who initially supported Starmer are now questioning his authenticity. How can someone who benefited so directly from educational opportunity now deny similar paths to others? The perception of disconnection from ordinary families grows stronger with each school closure announcement and each scholarship programme cut. When MPs confronted him with this hypocrisy on the parliamentary floor, Starmer's dismissive response only reinforced the accusation of dishonesty. It's one thing to change policy direction based on new evidence or evolving circumstances. It's quite another to actively dismantle the very systems that made your own success possible while claiming to champion opportunity for all. The fallout from this parliamentary confrontation isn't simply fading away.
I will defend our decisions in the budget all day long. I will defend facing up to the harsh light of fiscal reality.
The friends, the loved ones, those directly impacted, and of course the wider community here. But there's no pretending, I think, that
In what could become Starmer's most significant political crisis, the Independent Schools Council has now launched a High Court challenge against his VAT policy. Their legal argument? That the policy violates the human rights of children and parents by disrupting their education. A powerful claim that strikes at the very heart of Starmer's justifications. If this legal challenge succeeds, Starmer faces the prospect of an embarrassing policy reversal. Such a public defeat wouldn't just undermine his educational agenda, it would strike a devastating blow to his already diminishing credibility. The political costs would be enormous, potentially defining his leadership as one characterised by poor judgment and disconnection from ordinary families. As the educational landscape continues to fracture under the weight of his policies, we're witnessing what might be remembered as the moment Starmer's carefully constructed image of competence began to crumble. The question isn't just whether he can recover, but whether he's even willing to acknowledge the damage being done.